Alright, so this is a video I've been wanting to make for a while because I've seen a lot of reviews about the shiny new Pax Pamir 2nd edition, and in it, pretty much every critic has said they have not played the old Pax Pamir 1st edition. And that's fine. The game stands on its own. It's a wonderful game and it's worth reviewing on its own. But I think it's interesting to comment on the differences between the 2nd edition and the 1st edition. And as someone that has played the 1st edition 40 sometimes, and the 2nd edition not as much, maybe going on 10 times, I thought it was worth going over some of the differences, particularly if you like the 2nd edition and are perhaps interested in trying the 1st edition. So, the first thing that we'll talk about is the most obvious thing, the components. So, there's no denying that these components are amazing. These little resin pieces, nice chunky pieces on the board, are just a delight to play with. The chunky cylinders and other pieces are just really top-notch quality, particularly if you got it at the Kickstarter price. This is, definitely you're getting a lot of bang for your buck there. This little cloth mat here that you can roll up. Everything looks just really nice and thematic and beautiful, and I'm sure, Cole had that in mind and it came out wonderfully as compared to the 1st edition, which is a lot more, cheap. So you have these kind of regular cylinders, and you have regular cubes in place of the blocks and the cylinders in the old game. The original Pax Pamir 1st edition came with cards for the map, and the card box was about this big. Everything, including the expansion, fits in this box nice and flush. And that was one of the things that Sierra Madre Games used to do with all of their games, because they had to worry about shipping their games, and they wanted to keep their games small so that shipping was cheap. Particularly the German post office, I believe, charges more if it's over a kilogram, and one big thing that Sierra Madre used to do is make sure that all their games are under a kilogram. But I really liked that about the 1st edition. I liked that it was, this big, and I can fit it, in a very tiny space. And there was a lot of game in this very tiny box, as there are with a lot of Sierra Madre's games. The other things in the Pax series, and Neanderthal and Greenland, and just everything they do is a lot of game in a little amount of space. As far as the component quality of the, let me have here these tiddlywinks for money, whereas the new game comes with either these cardboard tokens or the metal coins that I do not have. But aside from that, yeah, that's basically it. So with component quality comes price. This originally retailed, I think, for $30. I got it for $24, which was an amazing bang for your buck. Again, I think this game is, one of the greatest games ever made. This is in my top 6 games, I think. This version, originally, I believe the Kickstarter was $60, and it is currently available on whirligig.com for $85. Which, again, the quality that you get for this game is great, but $85 is considerably more than $24. Though again, Pax Pamir 1st edition now, and you're only ever going to get it on the secondhand market, and it's going to cost you considerably more than that. Also, this board right here comes with the Pax Porfiriana Collector's Edition. In order to get this board, you have to buy the Pax Porfiriana Collector's Edition, which you should if you like these types of games anyway. But yeah, this does not come with the regular Pax Pamir. So, the next major thing to talk about, or the thing that I talk about when I teach this game, is the actions. So, Cole greatly simplified the actions in this game. In the new edition, there's 6 actions. And in the old edition, there is more. You have travel, counter-espionage, assassinate, bribe, campaign, commerce, gifts, and tax. I really like the changes that were made in the second edition. I feel like they are a lot more elegant than they are in the first edition. Some things were added as actions that didn't quite exist in the old version. For example, the build action is kind of like a simplified version of the consolidate action, which was added in the expansion for Pax Pamir. Also, the betray. Yeah, that's what I really like about the changes in the new edition is the way that things were kind of streamlined across the way that spies and troops work. So in the first edition, you would have a travel action, and that's how spies moved. And then you would have counter-espionage, which is the way that spies battled. And then you have assassinate, which works like betray now. But specifically, travel, counter-espionage, and campaign were different actions completely. And that was fine to me at the time, but after playing Pax Pamir 2nd edition, I kind of long for that simplicity of just being able to do one march or one battle action for everything. So in the new one, march and battle work for both spies and troops, and they work roughly the same in that march moves units equal to the rank of the card, and battle allows you to battle again equal to the rank of the card. Whereas with the old action, the campaign action allows you to move and attack, that in some ways I like better because it allows you to move and attack with one action. I remember playing a prototype where Cole first started doing march and attack as separate actions, and I was very frustrated because you needed both cards in your tableau in order to move and attack. And I still feel like that's more frustrating than it is in the old version. But I feel like you gain more than you lose by having move and battle actions that work for both. So one thing that I do miss is the bribe action, which I know there are bribes in the 2nd edition, but not really in this way. The bribe action in the 1st edition allowed you to pay 2 rupees to steal a card from another player's tableau. In the 2nd edition, the only thing that you can do is betray, which is essentially the same as assassinate. You pay 2 rupees to discard a card. I think that the bribe action was interesting, not only because it allowed you to keep the card and remove, as well as removing the card from another player. So for example, if you had something with loyalty, or if you had a patriot and the patriot was in the other player's tableau, not only would they lose one, but you would gain one, and that would be basically a 2-point swing there. The other interesting thing is that you would be able to change that player's, if it's a political card, a purple card, you would be able to change the color of the cubes in that region to your color. In the new one, you have the overthrow action, and the overthrow rule allows you to remove cylinders in on the map if you remove somebody's purple card, which is devastating. But being able to, again, switch colors on a set of cubes just made it all the more, dramatic. And I like and miss that action. The other ones are pretty straightforward. So commerce is another elegant streamlining. Tax, and the new one allows you to take rupees from market cards or from other players. So that's basically the commerce and tax actions put together in the old game. So in the old game, you can tax to take money from players, and you can commerce to take rupees from the market. So I do appreciate that that was kind of streamlined into one action. And gifts works pretty much exactly the same. You can place a cube on your thinger here. This is in place of the dial that is in the new version. So if you had a gift, you could put it there like that, and that would be the gift for your loyalty. So if you wanted to do a loyalty, let's say you had something like this, that would you would have loyalty for the the British here, and you would know who that gift was for. So that's generally how it worked in the old game. So in general, the actions I feel like were cleaned up, and for the most part, I like the actions more in the new one. Though again, you have a little more ease of use for some of them, and yeah, but for the most part, I like the new actions. So the next thing to talk about, or the next major thing, is victory conditions. So victory conditions in the new game were greatly simplified, and I feel like this is definitely the thing that Cole wanted to work on the most. He wanted to make the game easier to parse than the old game was. One common complaint of the old game was that it was difficult to find out when you were winning or when someone else was winning. In the new game, you are essentially waiting until a dominance check comes out, and you are wanting to be on the side that is dominant, if there is a side that is dominant, or have the most cylinders out on the board if no side is dominant, right? So an easy way to figure that out in the new game is just if there's a side with 4 more blocks than any other side, right? So you can just look at this and see, yep, pink has 4 more blocks out than any other side, so they are dominant. And that is about as easy to parse as you can make it. Same with cylinders. If you wanted to see who had the most cylinders, you just looked at, the number on their board there. So I have 4 cylinders out. If that's more than the other players, I know that I am scoring points when the dominance check comes out. The old game had a lot more involved in figuring out who was scoring points. So one thing to note is that the original game had one victory condition unless you played with a variant called nation building. So the victory condition was essentially, depending on the regime, whoever had the most units of that regime, plus at least one of every other unit, that would be the dominant regime, essentially. So in this case, let's say we are in political fragmentation, which is purple. So in political fragmentation, you need to have more tribes than anyone else combined, right? And what that means is that your side needs to have more tribes than anyone else combined, which means it's not just your cubes, it's all the cubes on your side. So if everyone is on the same side, then all the cubes count towards that. If you're the only one on that side, then only your cubes count towards that count. And at least one of every other unit. So the 4 units that you had to worry about were tribes, which are cubes on the board, troops, which are cylinders on the board, roads, which are cylinders between the spaces, and spies, which are cubes on cards. Not too dissimilar from the way that it works now. It's still cubes, or spies, troops, roads, and anyway, so depending on the regime, you would figure out, okay, if it's purple, I need to have more tribes than anyone else combined, and I need to have one of everything else, which meant that you couldn't win unless you had one of everything else. If you're missing roads, if somebody is, attacking your roads or attacking your troops to make sure that you don't have everything you need for your victory condition, that's a thing you had to worry about. Not a thing you have to worry about in a new game. So really you had to kind of parse the board state and see, okay, who is winning right now? Do I have one of everything? Check. Do I have more tribes than anyone else? Check. Okay, and are we in that regime? Yes, check. So if the regime suddenly changed, let's say you were winning, but then somebody changed the regime to military struggle, well, now it's whoever has the most troops. That's what matters, right? Or whoever has the most roads. That's what matters. Or whoever has the most spies. And again, one of everything else. So it could happen that you're playing to win a certain victory condition, and then somebody plays this card and it changes it to military struggle, and suddenly you're not winning anymore because the victory condition has changed. So that was part of the game, is kind of holding on to a card, saying, okay, I'm gonna keep this in my hand, and I'm gonna wait until I have met my victory condition for this when this card is played, and then play it, and then buy the topple, which is the dominance card in the old game, right? So it was a lot of kind of jockeying for having that position, and then being able to buy the topple in time to win the game, essentially. So there was a lot more secrecy, a lot more hidden, a lot more of a hidden element in how you would win the game. Whereas everything is very straightforward and open in the new game. At any point you can tell who has more blocks and who has more cylinders. And because there is no regime you need to be in to win, anyone can win at any point, right? So that is the base game, and the base game with new players, especially against experienced players, wouldn't last very long. I mean, it would usually be done in the first topple. With experienced players, it would actually go down to the last topple because of rules that I'll go over shortly. But essentially, that was the victory condition in the base game. The nation building variant, which was in the original rulebook but was expanded with the expansion, is a lot like the second edition is now. Essentially, you would score points at the end of every topple. So there would be a topple would come out, and someone would buy the topple, and if it was a successful topple, aka a successful dominance check, then the people that were loyal to the dominant regime would score points equal to their loyalty. So it wasn't 5-3-1 like it is in a new game. It would be, if you have 2 loyalty points, you get 2 points. If you have 5 loyalty points, you get 5 points. So everyone that was loyal to that regime would get at least 1 point, because in order to be loyal to a regime, you have to have at least 1 loyalty point, unless you were the Afghans, but we won't go into that. But so yeah, that would be the nation building variant. And at the end of that topple, we would clear everything out, regardless if it was successful or not, if I'm remembering correctly. And you would take all of your cards to your hand, and then you would put them out again at the start of the next phase. It was kind of the honeymoon period. The interesting thing there was that when you started the next round, I guess, you would already know what was in people's hands and the order that they could play things in. So if I had, certain card, I'm going to play this card to be able to put this down so that I can rule this region, etc., etc. And I know that they're going to play that card to be able to do this or that. And there was kind of, again, some jockeying for position to be able to do, the things that you needed to do to win whatever the current regime was. So again, a lot more nuance in how you would score points from round to round than there is in the new game. The new game is a lot more straightforward in how you score points, and there is only one way to play. It's that way. You didn't have the original rules and the nation building rules to choose from, and even then there were two different rules for nation building rules depending on if you were playing the latest version. So that is the victory conditions. Now to go over a couple of the changed rules. So one thing is starting loyalty. So at the start of the game, you would have a card like this, right? And then you would choose between two options, not like the new one where you get to choose any side. You only had two sides to choose from, and you choose either this side or this side. And depending on which side you chose, that number determined how your starting position. And everyone chose this at the same time, so you couldn't actually see what other people were choosing first and then choose a thing. So for example, if I decided to be Russian, I would go I would be 2. If somebody was 3 and 4, then I would be first. If I decided to be British, it would be 7. If again somebody had 3 and 4, I would be last. And then I would kind of tuck that into my tableau here like this, and that's how I would start the game. So hand limit was different. In the old game, you were not able to get as many cards as you wanted and then discard down. Your hand limit was limited to well, let me put this right here. So the hand limit was 1 plus the number of blue stars that you had. And if you already had one card in your hand, you could not grab another one. That is different from your tableau, which you can grow your tableau size as much as you wanted, 3 plus as many purple stars as you had, and then discard down. I do like the change that was made there to kind of just keep it consistent. It was, it's just an extra thing that you have to remember, that blue was not a thing that you can grow and purple was. So that was a good change, I think, on that. One of my favorite rules, though, in the new edition was the way that combat worked. So in this case, in the old game, let's say that you had, you were siding with the Afghans, which are green, and these were your tribes. These troops would protect these tribe. So if this British troop right here wanted to kill these tribe, they would first have to kill those troops, right? However, that was only the case if you did not have a spy in that region, right? So if I had a spy, or let's say that someone had a spy in Herat, right? Let's switch this around and say that, if somebody had a spy in Herat, let's assume that that's just another color, and I wanted to kill, and let's say I'm the one that, let's switch this around and say that I'm the British. Let me actually grab to make this example easier. All right. So let's say that orange was the British and I was the Afghans, right? And orange, which are the British, wanted to kill these. They can't until they go through these. And when you kill a thing in the old game, it was a 1-for-1 exchange. That means that if this troop wanted to kill this other troop, both of them would go away, right? So it was a very costly proposition to attack units. So in this case, I would basically have to have more things in there like that to be able to kill these, and then have one left over to be able to kill the spies, right? Not easy or quick to do. However, if Red had a spy in Herat, it could bypass these troops and immediately kill these spies. And when you kill, when you kill these tribes, and when you kill tribes, you don't have to, you don't lose anything. It's just a straight up slaughter. So these, with a campaign action, these troops could kill these spies and they're gone if there is a consenting spy. I keep saying consenting spy because a spy doesn't even have to be your spy. It could be someone else's spy that you can just negotiate to use in order to bypass those troops. So you could say, hey, we need to stop this person from winning. Can I use your spy to kill their tribes so that they're no longer winning by the next topple? And the person can say, yes, I'll let you do it. Or alternatively, you can say, hey, can I pay to use your spy? I'll give you a certain amount of money if you let me use your spy to attack those troops. So there was a lot more negotiation possible and a lot more kind of treachery. Whereas the new one is, there was a lot more attrition, which Cole says was more modeled the time more accurately. But essentially in the new one, if you have something like this, and you had tribes like that, right? And you're the pink side, and these are your tribes, the green side could just kill those tribes. They don't have to worry about these troops over here. They could just straight up slaughter those tribes. Also, if they were going to attack the troops, they could just attack the troop without losing anything in return. Now, you're limited to the amount of pieces that you have, but outside of that, you don't lose anything when you attack. And again, if I'm making mistakes with any of these, feel free to let me know. But that is a major change in combat, which I think models Root a little more than it does the original Pax Pamir. And it's easier in combat. It's more straightforward. I can't say which is better. I do like the treachery element more in the old version, but I do like the simpler rules in the newer one. I guess it's just personal preference. And, you know, I personally like to stick to things that are a little more treacherous and negotiation heavy than just straight up, you know, dudes on a map killing each other. But you know, that's just one major change between the two versions, and probably the biggest sticking point for me is that I really like that consenting spies rule, and I was sad to see it go. The other major change is that the old game had colored actions, right? So the travel, counter-espionage, assassinate, and bribe actions were always blue, which means that if you were in the favored suit, as if we're using the language of the new game, if you were in intelligence war, those actions would always be free regardless of what card they were. Cards didn't have a suit. Cards were just cards. And actions had specific suits. So instead of really a suit, you would have cards with colors on them. So for example, this card right here, in the new game, you would have something like this, right? And in the new one, you would have a blue card, and all of the actions on that blue card were free. Whereas in the old game, you would only have the blue action being free. So the new one allows a lot more flexibility in the actions that you would have. But I find graphically, I've found it difficult to, for example, note that this is a blue card, whereas, you know, that was very easy to tell that that was a blue action. And I don't know, I'd have to play the old or the new game more to see which one I prefer. I guess it's one of those things where, again, streamlining the rules benefits outweighs any perceived benefit from the old game. Graphically, I thought it was, I wish it was presented better. I never really liked this gradient. I felt like if it was, I mean, yeah, you have the blue there, but I've had a lot of people when I've been teaching, and I've taught this game a lot, because I've demoed it at different conventions. I've had people confused as to whether this was a blue card or a pink card, even though pink isn't a favorite suit. It is the more obvious color on this card than the blue is. Whereas here, the actions are pretty straightforward as to what a purple action is and a blue action and a red action. So that is major differences. Not everything is free on a card because there's no suit. It's just certain actions are available and certain actions are not. So that is another major change. A couple minor changes are things like the Patriots clearing or not clearing. So for example, in the new game, if you have something like this, these Patriots are always going to stay here until somebody buys them. So it can clog up the market, and that is intentional, according to Cole. That's, you know, he wants to, I forget the exact reasoning behind it, but it is something that allows the market to not move as freely as in the old game. Whereas in the old game, if you have a Patriot, and by the way, a Patriot in the old game has a band at the top. So if you had something like this, at the end of your turn, you would remove this card because Patriots in the 0 row would go away. And that allowed more movement of the market and allowed more actions and more possibilities to happen in the market than in the new game. And yeah, as far as that's concerned, I haven't found it to be an issue with the market becoming clogged, but I have heard people be frustrated that, you know, there isn't anything they can buy and the market doesn't change as much as it should. So I don't know. I'd have to play the new one more to see what, you know, which one I prefer. But right now I don't really mind too much either version of it. So other major changes are essentially the way negotiation works. So the original game allowed any kind of negotiation. It was pretty freewheeling in that you could say, hey, I'll give you, take something from your tableau, and you could say, I'll give you this card if you give me 2 money, or I can give you this card just so that you can stop this person from doing this thing. Any kind of negotiation was really possible. And there were different kinds of negotiation that was listed in the original rule book, as you can see right here. And they had 3 examples kind of showing the different things that you can do. You can do auctions. You can do discounts on like bribes and stuff like that, and which you can still do in the current game. And you had essentially you could contract your services out, right? So again, I mentioned before, if you had like a spy, you could sell that spy to somebody, or you can sell the services of that spy to somebody. Or if you had a lot of troops on the board, you could say, hey, if you give me this amount of money, I will attack these people for you. That was changed early on when it was found, particularly by a group that's local, was going down to the last topple every time because they were just doing what they needed to do to stop the current person from winning. So the negotiation rules were kind of tightened up a bit in that you couldn't freely exchange cards or money. You had to use the gift action. And the gift action had an extra ability now in that you can use the gift action to give players money equal to the rank of the card. So if you had something like this, right? I can say, okay, I'm gonna use the gift action to give 2 rupees to that person, and then if they do a thing that I want them to do, like it's okay, I'll give you 2 rupees if you kill these tribes for me, right? So I'm going to use one of my 2 actions to do that, and then on their turn they would do that action, and the transaction would, it kind of limited the amount of negotiation or the amount of freewheeling that you can do in a game. Another thing that you can do is that you can purchase cards from other players. It's not a thing, honestly, in 40-some games, it's not a thing that I ever even actually saw. But you could say, okay, I'm going to sell you this card for any amount. So you can buy cards from the market just like you regularly would. It's a purchase action. So instead of purchasing something from the market, you can purchase it from another player. You can say, hey, I'll buy that from you for any given amount. And it would not be limited by the gift because it would be a purchase action. So you can say, I'll give you 10 rupees for that card if you really wanted that card. That does not exist in the new version. Cole originally asked me when he was working on 2nd edition if that was a thing that people used, and it wasn't. And as cool as it sounds, I never really found a need to buy somebody's card, and I don't think anyone would have sold it. Usually if you're putting down a card, you put it down for a reason. So removing that rule is, I think, is fine in order to streamline the rule set. But again, when it comes to stuff like bribing, that's another matter entirely, where it's not voluntary and you would often want to do that. And that's a thing that I did wish that existed. So yeah, I think that's most of the changes. Essentially, the old game is a lot more nuanced in that you have a lot more abilities to negotiate and trade and betray and just be a terrible person and backstab. And it's a lot trickier to figure out who's winning. Kind of, you have to plan ahead and saying, okay, not only do I need to have, you know, the most troops or tribes or spies or roads, but I also need it to be in that regime when it happens. So I need to both work towards doing that and that. And it still has the same issue of people may be on the same side. So let's say that you do have the most troops, tribes, roads, or spies, and it is in that regime. You still need to be the most loyal in order to either win the game outright if you're playing the regular version, or win the game or score points if you're playing the nation building variant. So it just added that much more nuance or dynamism, or however you want to say it, to the game. And it was a lot less visible, a lot less obvious how to do that, how to score. So those were really elements of the game that I liked. A couple more things that I want to mention, though, regarding the expansion, which is stuff that Some stuff I play with every game, and some stuff that I never play with outside of like the first couple times that I tried it. One thing that I play in every game is using these Wazir cards. So these Wazir cards are very similar to these tokens in that when you rule a region, and ruling works the same way, where you have to have at least one tribe and more pieces than anyone else, you would take a Wazir card, right? Just like in the new one, you would take this token, which, you know, not terribly easy to figure out who ruled a region, because not only are these things kind of hard to see, but there's no words on them, so I would have to, okay, that's a star, and yeah, that's the star, so that's Persia. And yeah, you could kind of look at it, so you can say, okay, well, red has the most pieces in there, so obviously they're ruling, but it wasn't as easy as this, where you would just take the Persia card and put it on your tableau, and you would see, okay, this person rules Persia and Herat. It's very obvious because it's listed right there. They rule Persia and Herat. And the Wazir cards also give you special abilities. So the Wazir card allowed you to do what is the equivalent of the build action in the new game. So the consolidate action allows you to add tribes and cylinders to the board for 2 rupees each. So that is similar to the build action, except in the build action in the new one, you can only use it to add cylinders to the board. You can't use it to add, or sorry, blocks to the board. You can't use it to add cylinders. So this was very helpful if you wanted to pay money to be dominant by the next topple, right? The other thing is you can pay 6 to change the regime. So I mentioned before that not only do you have to have the most of a certain thing, you also have to be in the right regime. Well, having one of these allowed you to do one of those. So if you are winning but you need to change the regime, you can do that. Or if you're in the right regime and you just need more things, you can do that. And this would not be a card that would sit in your tableau. This would be a card that would add to an existing card. And this was kind of a very fiddly way to do it, where you would say, okay, so I'm going to take this card, I'm going to put it here. Now this Wazir is hosted by the Baluchi smugglers, and the strength of that card would be whatever the card hosting it was, right? So in this case, the strength of the card would be 2 stars. And that would matter for this right here. So the Trans-Caspian Wazir card, when you do a campaign action, the campaign action would be the strength of that card. So it would be 2 stars. I do like the Wazirs better graphically. They're definitely easier to tell who is ruling a region than it is in the new version. A couple other things about the expansions that I don't use are the headlines, the events, and the abilities. So these were added to the new version. So you'll notice here that certain cards have certain abilities, like this is civil service reforms. There are no such things in the old game. In the old game, cards just had their permanent abilities, which are the operations that you have, right? If you wanted abilities, you would have to get, and again, if you were playing with the expansion, you would have something like this, where you would need to have this many stars in your tableau to activate it, and then you would have that ability, right? And you can add more stars to make an action better. So that is not necessarily a thing I'm going to cover too much, but essentially if you had something like that and you wanted to add an extra star there, you can do that by playing one of these cards. And I'm not going to go through all of the rules of how that works because frankly I don't remember it that well. I played the expansion a few times and didn't really enjoy it too much, so I'm very foggy on those rules. The other thing you would do is have events. Now these were similar to the headlines in Pax Porfiriana. This game was the second PAX game after Pax Porfiriana, and this was modeled on Pax Porfiriana. So these were basically put in to model it more like the original Pax Porfiriana, which had headlines that did certain things. So in this case, this would be in the market, and if somebody played this event or purchased it, if it's discarded, you resolve the event. If somebody purchased it, it would prevent the event. I found that the events and the abilities kind of diluted the deck too much. And it also made the game a lot more random and swingy. And I didn't really enjoy that. It's still a tactical game, but I liked having a little more strategy involved and being able to plan my moves more. And that's one thing that is definitely different in the new version. The new version is a much more tactical, swingy game. You're changing loyalties a lot more. You are gaining new abilities that can, break certain elements. It's definitely a lot more dynamic of a game. It's a lot more fragile. It's a lot more, just more can happen from turn to turn, which some people say, well, particularly in a 4 or 5 player game, it can be really chaotic because so many things can happen before it goes back to your turn. And yeah, it's that kind of game. I mean, if you've played, other games where that can happen, particularly Carl Chudik games and stuff like that, then it's just the nature of the game. But if you do want a more strategic game, then going with something like Pax Pamir First Edition is worth checking out. So yeah, there are a couple other things. It was possible, for example, to be impossible to win a game of Pax Pamir First Edition because you needed cards that didn't exist in the deck and you didn't know that. And that's a thing that I know Cole worked on in the newer edition. That's probably why there were changes in the suits instead of the colors. There's a couple other things that I didn't mention. For example, the favor cards. In the original game, if somebody was had the favor of a certain regime, let's say that you were more loyal to the Russians than anyone else, you would get a Russian favor card. And it would give you a special ability. And it was actually pretty nice to be able to tell, okay, yes, that person is now the most loyal. I know this because they have the favor card. It was very easy to tell, and they got that ability. Whereas in the new game, there's no such thing. There is no easy way to parse who is loyal to whom outside of just looking at their tableau. So I do like that, but these are removed in the nation building variant, which is the version that I prefer in First Edition. So it's not even really a thing that I play with, though again, graphically figuring out or having something graphical that determines who is the most loyal would help, since that was the part of the design goal of the second edition is to do that. But yeah, I think that's most of the changes. I'm sure I'll think of something after this, but for the most part, yeah, if you did like the second edition, and it's a great game, I highly recommend it. It's considerably easier to teach. And that's the one thing that I really enjoy with the second edition is I can teach it in a third of the time that it takes me to teach the first edition. But if you did like the second edition and you were interested in perhaps something that's a little more nuanced, a little more strategic, then definitely I highly recommend checking out the first edition. Yeah.